So, Doug, everyone assumes that the United States, kind of has always been and will always be, but that's really not the case, is it?
Hmm. No, it's not. We could actually start with arguing that the way the U.S. is right now, it shouldn't have even started that way. Uh, the Articles of Confederation, when the Constitutional Convention was put together in 1789, I think the Articles of Confederation were much more. That convention in 1789 was put together to modify the Articles of Convention, not to have a whole new constitution and to put these 13 colonies together. So, I mean, you could easily start back then when we got off on the kind of on the wrong foot with at that time, a weak central government, which later became a strong central government after the so-called Civil War. But I think what's coming up now, Matt, is a division of the United States into several units based on culture as much as anything else. And so you got to ask yourself, well, what is culture? And why is that important to political entities? And the answer is culture is a subtle thing. It's about the religious values of people. It's about the languages they speak. It's about their traditions. It's about their general worldview. And it's about their belief systems in general. And it seems to me that if you're going to have political divisions at all, and as an anarcho-capitalist, I think that, well, first of all, the nation state, of which we're one, which there are about 200 in the world today, that's a recent phenomenon that only came into being during the 17th century. I mean, before then, it was all about kingdoms and empires where you were loyal to the ruler as opposed to the nation state. So, as it says in the Al Stewart song, On the Border, which is incidentally one of my favorite songs, on the wall, the colors of the map are running. They always have been, they always will be, and especially now. I think the world is going to break down, and many, many of the world's countries are completely artificial, not only artificial, but dysfunctional constructs. And the US used to be different that way. Everybody used to get along pretty well together, but that's no longer the case. I just don't think it's a fact anymore. So
when a country,
we're coming up on a civil war.
Civil war. So does it have to be civil war for a country to break into, to fragment into smaller pieces? Does it have to be induced by a civil war?
No, it doesn't, and it shouldn't be. For instance, let me start, if I can, by saying that what we call the American Civil War, the unpleasantness of 1861 to 1865, was not, in fact, a civil war. It was a war of secession, which is a very different thing. A civil war is a conflict where two or more groups are fighting for control of the same government and fighting for control of the same territory. What happened in the 1860s was not a civil war, it was a war of secession. The South simply wanted to part company. That's all it was about. And why didn't it? Why couldn't it? Well, it certainly could have, because they seceded, or most of the southern states seceded after Lincoln was elected. And Lincoln really pushed the issue. He threatened them with war. This is funny about the U.S. Civil War, though. It's that everybody thinks it was about slavery. Slavery really had nothing to do with it at all. slavery was widely acknowledged in both the North and the South as being a immoral or morally questionable institution. Everybody really agreed on that. And most people are unaware that the last country to get rid of slavery in the Western Hemisphere was Brazil. Mm. And it was done totally non-violently, happened in 1888. The US was back then much more advanced than Brazil. Slavery would have fallen apart because it was uneconomic. So it wasn't about slavery. What it was about was the fact that in those days, the government's only source of income was tariffs, import duties. That was 90% of the income of the federal government in those days. And most of the imports were to the South. The South exported 75% of its produce, agricultural produce, cotton, tobacco, mostly other things, to Europe. So their big trade relationship was with Europe. And when they bought machinery or luxury goods, it was all from Europe. But the tariffs benefited the North. Furthermore, the North wanted higher tariffs because the North was the industrial power. And they wanted protectionist tariffs to, so they didn't have to compete with European manufacturers, which produced better quality and lower cost goods. So at the time of the Civil War, tariffs were 15%, and they were on the point of being, this is what really set it off. They were going to be raised to 30% and then to 50% after that. And that was insupportable for the South to have to basically destroy their trading relationship with Europe. The other thing that the Civil War was about was new states like Kansas and many others were going to come into the Union. Well, were they going to come in as slave or free states? Why was that important? Because if they were slave states, they would tilt the balance in Congress about tariffs and other things like that. But it was a cultural issue too. The culture in the South was very, I hope I'm not going on too far about
this is it's interesting.
War, but I think this all relates.
Yeah.
There was a cultural divide between the North and the South too. South was rural, big plantations with economic power. North was smaller farms and more traders and industrial. So there was a cultural conflict as well. So it was logical that they just simply split off. But Lincoln wanted to hold it together for, well, maybe because he didn't want it to fall apart on his watch, personal ego. Maybe it was economics about the taxes. Who knows? But it was a major turning point in American history where after the war between the states, or some people actually quite accurately call it the War of Northern Aggression, because that's what it actually was. The North invaded the South. The country's changed. It used to be these United States is how the country was called. Now it is, of course, the United States. So now we don't have to have a civil war. And maybe we won't this time because there's a recent movement for California, Oregon, and Washington to split off. I mean, there's some people that think that way. That's one possibility.
Yeah, the
happen.
It does seem like the seeds that caused the first one, are present again, not necessarily in the tariffs, but certainly in the the cultural divide between the urban and non-urban centers, the coastal elite and flyover country. Those differences seem as big as anything I can imagine. Do you think that there is the differences between like the flyover country and the coastal elites is as extreme today as it was during the Civil War?
More extreme, actually, much more extreme. Because it amazes me that Americans can't talk to each other or relate once you find out if you're a kind of a blue county person or a red county person, if you're a so-called liberal or a so-called conservative. I mean, this is happening at Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners, where if you have members of your family that have these vastly different political views, I mean, it becomes very acrimonious. And this is across the whole country. And it's actually a cultural thing. It's not just a political thing. It's become a cultural thing. It's your basic belief systems. So that's why this war, that's why this coming election is so critical. And I'm of the opinion that, I think we talked about this already. I think, didn't we talk about the 6 reasons? And I figured that.
You think Trump will probably lose. Yeah. And I think, I think the problem with this election, regardless, is it's not going to resolve these seemingly irreconcilable differences between, these groups. And it's probably not even breaking it down into, red versus blue is probably even too broad to actually really separate the differences, although there is a clear line, I think, between those two. And when I use the word irreconcilable, it just makes me think of divorce, and that divorce is what's really needed. There needs to be, to avoid civil war, it seems like you need to, recognize that it's not working and seek a mediator, like you would in a divorce, and just, try to end peaceably for the benefit of the kid's long-term future, don't destroy the family.
Yeah, of course, there are going to be problems with a divorce, like who assumes the national debt, which is, I don't know what it is. It's going up hyperbolic. Is it 26 or 27 trillion now? I don't know. It's going up so quickly.
Fast. I think it's 27, but it's going up so fast it's hard to keep track.
Yeah. So who assumes that, and in what portion? And the U.S. military, which has bases and things of this nature all over the country, who assumes that? Well, the Russians split it up nicely, and they had a huge military too. So, but these things are problematical, and whoever is the president might act like Lincoln. It's not on my watch.
Yeah.
But just the recent acquisition of states by the U.S., I think, is improper. Hawaii, in particular, was taken over by a coup. It was a local coup d'état. It was an independent country, and it was basically, I mean, this has led to the long-standing dislike of what Native Hawaiians are left against, invaders from the mainland. I mean, they know that the whole island chain would have been theirs if these white men hadn't taken it over. Of course, it would have done. It's a really, what's going to happen? How's the U.S. going to break up? Even if we don't have something violent or peaceful in the next few years, it's going to happen anyway, because the whole Southwest, which is becoming majority Hispanic, for that matter, California is majority Hispanic now, or close to it. But the whole Southwest, they talk about the Reconquista. I mean, there's a Mexican restaurant in Aspen, where I usually am during the summers, and they have a little sign. It's like a foot square sign talking about the Reconquista and how it's going to happen. And it will, because demographics rule all. Yep. And these people, the people in Northern California, totally different culture from Southern California, and totally different again from the farming areas to the east.
Yep.
I mean, they don't belong together in one political entity, because when you're in one political entity and you're vastly different types, one winds up exploiting the other through the state, through taxes and regulations. Whoever controls the state winds up helping one group at the cost of the other. And it just breeds resentment. And the resentment turns into hatred after a certain point.
That's definitely where we are now, because it feels like the the people on the right feel like they're being, completely steamrolled, even though, we have the Republicans have, the Senate and the presidency. I think they feel like they're being totally steamrolled culturally and, by the left, and they can't, and they're just they're on their heels defending themselves. And at the same time, it seems like the left believe that, this is a nation with, deep systemic racism. It's a huge problem, and it's really unfair to, to its constituents. And it's like, how do you resolve those? Both plan to resolve them by taking the reins of government to put down the other side. And that obviously, I don't see how that works.
It's not going to work. It can't work. So that's why I'm really very confident that the riots and violence that we've seen over the last few months are going to accelerate and become much more serious as the election approaches and after the election. And it doesn't matter who wins, because if the Democrats win, as I suspect they will, what's going to happen? Well, one piece of tinder that's going to blow this thing up is their attitude towards gun control. The Democrats are radically and rabidly anti-gun, and the Republicans, I mean, they're not going to let them. I mean, this is going to be a big problem if they pass laws saying that, and of course they'll do it gradually. They have to be registered. They have to be this. They have to be that. The other thing, but I think the gun guys in the country are just not going to put up with it. Then what happens?
And there are a lot of gun guys.
Lots. And I understand that the gun stores in the U.S. are basically sold out of inventory now. I've heard that.
It is definitely difficult to get your choice of firearm today, and ammunition, of course, is becoming difficult as well. So,
I understand that the average 9mm round, which is a very common and cheap round, normally at 10 cents, is going for as much as $1.30 a round now. I've heard this. I don't know.
I haven't seen $1.30, but I did hear about it being, over 80 cents anyway, but that was a couple months ago. So yeah, I mean, boy, it's hard to imagine. You think that would be a great business today to be in.
Well, if the Democrats are elected, though, I mean, one backdoor to overthrowing the Second Amendment is very high taxes on both guns and ammunition.
Yep. I agree. I remember in 2008 in the financial crisis, there was this this Russian what was he? I guess he was a former, KGB analyst who talked about, was predicting that the U.S. would break apart, and he was saying by 2010. This was in 2008 in the midst of the financial crisis. And he thought that it would primarily be economic driven. He's like, it's culturally different, but it'd be economic.
Was that Dmitry Orlov? Does that ring a bell?
That could be him. I'm sure I have it in my notes here. I can't find it right at the moment, but yeah, I mean, I think I heard about him originally from Casey Research, you guys talking about him and showing he had a map of, how he thought the country would break apart. And he had, it was all essentially a data-driven analysis. And one of his core things, he thought that what would happen is it would be economic. And then some of the major states, what they would do is they would withhold tax receipts to the federal government. They would essentially just opt out. And you can imagine a situation with California, which has talked about this sort of thing already. They've been floating the idea. Even Governor Newsom's called California the nation of California, a month or so ago. And
of course, it used to be with the Royal Flag, the Great Bear, and all this. Well, same with Texas, actually, too.
Yeah. So, but I hadn't heard that floated in a long time. Calling your state a nation, and it was interesting that he did it. I think it was very interesting, but it could be peaceful, essentially, more like the Soviet Union's collapse was, in that, there was just sort of the central government kind of gave up. So we can't manage all this. And then, it just sort of broke apart relatively peacefully.
Well, of course, the U.S. is so large at this point and so complex and has become so diverse, there's a hot button word that's worth talking about, diverse, that it is actually unmanageable. And the perverse thing of it is that the government in Washington, D.C. now attempts to micromanage absolutely everything. So the more unmanageable the U.S. becomes, as it becomes more complex and richer and so forth, the more the people in Washington try to manage it in detail. So, that's an explosion in the making too. I mean, listen, in primeval times, it was possible, and I would argue was never moral, was never ethically correct, for a government, a king, whatever, to designate the ox cart has to, be such and such a size, and it can only travel so many miles in a day, and make all these rules because it was a primitive society. The rules could be simple and enforceable, perhaps, but now, with billions of transactions per day, it's totally counterproductive for the government to try to manage these things. So, yeah, I think the U.S. not only will break up, but it actually should break up. I'd like that because some parts of it might be pro-freedom, in which case I would love to move to those parts.
Yeah, one of the things that I find interesting about the prospect of a breakup, especially if you could do it, what I think first of all would be interesting is if is to try and expand most people's Overton window. So the idea of a breakup of the states is something that you could talk about in polite company. It's almost like, it's something that's just like totally off the table. It's it's something unimaginable. And I think that if you don't consider that basic idea of free association, if that's not even part of the conversation, it seems like you really no chance of finding a solution. So first of all, expanding that Overton window, but then you can imagine, one of the problems with the United States today is that there isn't that common thing that ties people together. And I don't like a lot of the things that some nations might use to tie a culture together. Israel will use, service in the military, for instance. It's one common experience that every Israeli citizen has. So they're coming from the same place. They have some of the same experience and perspective. Like when I talked to someone else who was in the Army, we could talk about our MOSs. There's all specific language that you use that's only used in the military. And we have we just have some root that's the same, some shared experience, but there isn't that goes across the nation now at all. Like there is no shared experience among a people. And so there's no identity and, pride in it, no desire to preserve it. And so finally, my thought is if you broke up into a number of different, smaller conglomerates of states, essentially, unions of states, that you could because you could opt into them. You really could opt in. Like there could be real pride associated with it about really creating something new, and really creating something that really, or being part of something that stands for the ideals that you believe are really important. And I just think you could have this, like all Texans for the most part, have a sense of identity that is uniquely different than basically anyone else in the country. There's something about Texas that feels, that kind of grabs a hold of you once you live there for any period of time, especially if you're born there. It just seems like that's possible for everybody.
And it's also true of New Yorkers, quite frankly, and even people from Brooklyn in particular.
Right. Yeah. That like neighborhood identity, that borough identity it does give people some sense of connection and it helps them make sense of their lives, I think, to have that. But we don't have that across the country at all.
Well, it could be, and there's no reason why at this point you can't have city states. One of the things that Trump did, which I absolutely approve of, is that he, I'd like to see everything possible deducted against federal taxes. But when he made state and local taxes non-deductible, that's had a real effect. I mean, that's one of the main drivers, taking people out of these high tax states like California and New York, elsewhere. So that's a form of discipline against
Right.
these local governments.
That's right. I mean, basically, yeah, before there was no consequence for their decisions because, basically the tax revenue, instead of going to the federal government, go to the city or state. And, but for the taxpayer, they were going to be paying it anyway. So it was of no real consequence. But
You know,
yeah,
there
when
was a
that,
fellow, when the Era Society existed, something I ran for 30 years every summer in Aspen, and we'd have a lot of world-class people who came and gave speeches. It was a party for people that were supposed to amuse each other. It was a party for people who I always said should know each other, but may not, to get to know each other. Anyway, one of the guys that used to come to that, and I'm blanking on his name because I just thought of this. Among the books he wrote was, well, one called The 100 Most Important People in History. Uh, and it was a pretty shrewd book. Incidentally, the person I recall he said was the most important person in history was Muhammad. Uh, but in a speech that he gave to the group, and we were generally about 100 people, one summer, he said that, and this was 20 years ago, easy. He said, the US is going to break up along racial grounds. And everybody was kind of shocked at the time. But that's actually becoming more and more the case, I think. He may be prescient in that.
well, I mean, certainly if you talk about the Southwest, and the Hispanics, I mean, that's a perfect example of it. The demographics essentially just are going to, pull it in a certain way. I mean, one of the things I think it's probably worth just sharing some history with people on is what the different kind of models for breakup can be, just so that people can have an idea in their head about the way these can work. We talked about just briefly about the Soviet Union. I mentioned Czechoslovakia and the Velvet Divorce. Can you give people a sense of how it could go? It can be just because it could be violent. It doesn't have to be violent. It could be. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, look, there are a few countries in the world today that we can use as templates. Um, the big dividing line, well, let's look at the dividing lines in different countries, like Fiji. You have East Indians and native Fijians, and they hate each other. They don't interbreed, they don't do anything, but they've got one country. So it's a question of who gets control of the military and the political, but I don't know. Big problems in Fiji for that reason. Same thing in Guyana in South America. It's there you've got once again the East Indians, and in that case you've got the blacks. So these are two groups that are totally at each other's throat. And now that they've gotten a big offshore oil discovery in Guyana, now there's something to really fight over. So they're going to have a civil war or break up. I don't know. It's hard to say. So race can be actually a big thing. And religion, not in the US, but in other countries, generally backward countries, like in Nigeria, there's a country that definitely shouldn't be one country. It's totally dysfunctional. You've got the Mohammedans in the north and the Christians in the south, and of course a bunch of animists scattered around. The Central African Republic, there was a place that I was going to go about 5 years ago, but I couldn't get in because the airport had shut down. I'd already gotten to Paris, but I couldn't go the rest of the way because the airport was covered with thousands of refugees, hoping that the blue helmets would keep them from being hacked up with machetes by their neighbors. That was Christian versus Mohammedan. So it can be religion in different places. It can be race or religion. Those are two big things. It can be political beliefs. I'll tell you the way it should. Maybe here's a country that's anomalous and works very, very well. Works really well. Switzerland. There you've got four, but if you count the Romansh people around St. Moritz, but you've got the Italians, the Swiss, and the Germans. And really, they're quite different from each other, different cultures and everything. But they have a cantonal system, and you pay, all the rules are made by the canton. Citizenship is granted by the canton. To get a Swiss passport, your canton grants it to you, not the national government, although it's a national passport, obviously. Um, and taxes. The federal government only charges a national defense tax, which is it's about 10% at the moment. I'm not sure about that. All other taxes, which vary greatly between the cantons, are cantonal taxes, and they get along fine. What they have in common is, well, they have a lot of things in common, a lot of things different, but the cantonal system works quite well in Switzerland. Maybe that's an alternative.
But what in Switzerland is the common thing that ties them together so that they go, we're better off being one nation versus just, balkanizing the country and breaking apart into our, Italians versus Germans?
Yeah, I'm going to have to. I lived in Switzerland for a year, and, it only became a country per se around 1800, more or less. Don't have the exact, not an expert on Swiss history, but what is it? I guess, the Germans, the French, the Italians, those countries have always had lots of problems. Here they are surrounded by mountains altogether, but they do kind of share a culture, but it works extremely well. Good question. And speaking of the French and the Germans and the Italians, up until 1871, Germany was about 300 duchies and counties and principalities and minor kingdoms, and they were all joined together by business. Huge mistake. Wouldn't have had World War I or World War II if Germany hadn't been, tied together into one country. Same thing with Italy. Scores of kingdoms and principalities joined together by Garibaldi. Big mistake. And I think Italy will break apart again too. And of course, there's movement in that direction. Same thing with France, actually. There are independence movements to this day in France. So
what do you think?
Smaller is better. I mean, ideally, I'd like to see a world where we had 7 billion little countries. They're all independent and sovereign, but friendly. And if you're small like that, you're not going to get together and build nuclear weapons and so forth. It's not economic. It serves no useful purpose.
Right. What do you think is the process of essentially a nation fragmenting into its smaller parts is often called Balkanization, and that's like this. It's a term of derision. It seems like it certainly has a derogatory. Seems derogatory, at least when I think of the term. When did that term become a negative thing? Like where it's just an awful thing for a country to break into its more distinct parts?
I think that must have started with the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. And throughout the Balkans, you've got people that are Christians and people that are Mohammedans, and they just don't get along. I mean, the Greeks and the Turks have been at each other's throats forever. That's I guess Balkanization is, we'll have to, now that is a historical subject that is worth researching, and I actually haven't done it. That's maybe something we should look into. Maybe that's an example of people breaking up into small entities where it didn't work out well. But maybe that's got nothing to do with it. I think it's mainly, once again, a cultural divide, but one that centers on religion in that case. That's my guess.
Yeah, I definitely think it's worthy of later discussion because, essentially in the media, anytime you talk about a the fear of a country breaking up, they refer to it as we don't want the Balkanization of whatever, and
Mhm.
it is just it's you said it has a derogatory meaning now. It's for some reason, and I'm not sure if it really ought to or not, but certainly there's a lot of virtue in in things breaking down to smaller pieces rather than being these total artificial constructs of some European monarchs or whatever that actually shape the actual borders of the countries.
Well, the way I see it, politics is the basic poison. Politics itself is poisonous
Hmm.
because politics is about coercion. It's about force. It's about professional busybodies that think they want to control and give orders to other people. So I think that although everybody today thinks politically, uh, it's an improper way of thinking from the very start. I think that it would be better if we say we had 7 billion little sovereign states. The chances of my wanting to grab a gun and conquer my next door neighbor, the chances of that or of anybody doing that are about zero. That's just not the way it works. It would be a much more civil society where you don't institutionalize force in the form of a state.
Hmm.
And problems of order are easily solved in the market, much the way problems of order in a restaurant. I mean, you don't need a cop standing in a restaurant to make the patrons pay their bills. It's not necessary. And in a properly ordered society, the whole area, the whole cultural area could be looked upon as a big restaurant, if you would.
I think this should be another topic we should talk about this week as well, actually, because and the there are a lot of people who seem to believe that if you didn't have the government and these rules, that everything would collapse. And for instance, I got into a debate with somebody not long ago about how that it's very difficult for people to open and operate a restaurant on a small scale. So if you're like if you're somebody who makes really great enchiladas and everyone tells you they're great enchiladas and you want to open a little enchilada stand or whatever, just the barriers to entry are incredibly high. And a lot of it's driven by permits and health department guidelines and then food inspections and things like that. And the crux of the argument from the person I was discussing this with was, well, if you didn't have those health codes, then how could you keep the person from serving food that was unhealthy or dangerous for people? And there's something there seems to be a deep lack of faith in people, in other people. Like it's just like they can't be trusted, so they have to have these rules or else they'll be bad. It's almost like a Hobbesian view. It seems to kind of dominates most people's thinking today about the other people they don't know.
Yeah, well, now more than ever, because all these health rules and so forth basically were only put into effect during, starting with Teddy Roosevelt, and then they were cemented with his cousin, Franklin Roosevelt. But, you're quite correct. They make it very hard for somebody who's small, who doesn't have capital, to start out with all the hoops that the government makes them jump through. And of course, how much money can he make when he's got to pay income tax on anything he does make and all kinds of other taxes, from real estate taxes to franchise taxes? I mean, there's thousands of them. So I'm for abolishing all of these things. And you know what? The big reason is personal responsibility, because there are things like Yelp for restaurants, where if a restaurant is known to serve crappy food and have a dirty kitchen and the rest of it, people find out. It goes out of business.
Yep.
And hopefully will be replaced by somebody that wants a successful restaurant where it's done properly. So this is all hysteria. These are all chimeras created by government people that want to develop fear to give meaning to their almost useless lives. Fear. They cultivate fear in the population. Oh God, I'm so afraid. I need somebody to protect me. So,
Right. But the idea that you're protected by rules, there's not actually like anyone. You don't have a bodyguard standing around you, tasting your food, warding off people who might assault you, or doing any of those things. There's just rules against those things, and when you look at, you can go to any municipal health or county health department website and see, you know, uh, hundreds of health violations for restaurants that are out there that have been in business for a long time that are still serving. So it's like the state creates the rules, even recognizing even and the rules, the fact that the rules are there don't keep those restaurants from violating the rules, obviously, because they sometimes get caught by the health department. So it doesn't even work.
doesn't even work. Yeah, it doesn't even work. And, you know, these inspectors, what are they? They're bureaucrats that can't get a real job actually producing something that people want voluntarily. So they can be bribed and they get sloppy. And, this is why it's like the post office. Post office has a terrible reputation, well deserved. And FedEx has an excellent reputation, equally well deserved. So the market sorts these things out.
Yeah. So what I would like to talk about at some point, not now because this is I could stray too far with this, but and I just would like your thoughts on, you know, the idea that I think especially this millennial generation, they have no faith in their fellow man, no faith in their fellow man, and so I had dinner with a group of millennials a couple of nights ago, and they all they're telling me they were basically arguing for the government having these rules and these policies, not the food violation stuff, but stuff similar to that. And I said, well, but I trust all of you. I trust you guys. And I'm like, do you guys not trust each other? And like, no, we trust each other. I'm like, but you don't understand. What you don't trust is the other. Like, you have this fear of the other, this person that you imagine in your head that you don't even know. You're afraid that person can't be trusted, that person is, just going to behave so poorly. And I'm like, they come from this, they're getting some indoctrination around this anti-racist stuff. And I'm like, do you see that like your view of the other is very similar to what a racist their view of the other might be? They can't be trusted. They can't be relied on to engage in proper behavior. They have to be forced by the state to behave well. I mean, like it's shocking to me, their lack of faith in their fellow man. And I don't know what that root of that is.
A part of it is the indoctrination that they've received through their life, subtly through the media and overtly through the school system. But, if they don't trust other people, what they're really saying is, I'm afraid that guy might do what I might do and be untrustworthy. So I'm not talking about being a naive Pollyanna and just trusting everybody, but people that don't trust anybody are generally, I think, untrustworthy themselves.
I think you're right. And you don't have to totally trust somebody, to trust them in all things, in all ways, to be able to assume that, to be able to operate successfully in the world. I mean, you can, it's maybe it's a little trust but verify with people, but it's not, you shouldn't, it's assuming that the nature of a person is so bad that they will engage in activities that are, just abhorrent if they're not policed properly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are people that are, whether they know it or whether they're willing to admit it or not, they're obsessed by fear. So they're willing to have, a big bad guy with a gun keep control of everybody, including themselves. Not the kind of society I want to live in, quite frankly.
No, I don't either. Well, I think we need to work on some education for those, because I actually just don't think that when I was having this dinner with these millennials again, I don't think that they'd ever thought about this problem deeply, like to understand why they had this fear of others again, this is a nameless other. It's not, they couldn't name a single person they know that they would worry about when it really came down to it, just totally abusing other people. Like they just couldn't imagine, they don't know a person, but they imagine that most people that they don't know are that way. And I just don't know. I don't know where that comes from. They need some good education on the other side, I think.
Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't get to associate with many millennials these days.
It's
So
interesting. It's interesting. It's a trade-off. We should maybe have a conversation about millennials too at some point, because I think they're misunderstood.
yeah,
But
I can only give you opinions from afar on that subject, so they may not be very valid.
okay. Well, all right. Well, I think that's good for today. The big message is that the U.S. will, no matter what, it's going to break up into some different parts. The question is how we do it at this point, right?
Yes,
How it
I'd
happens.
say that's an accurate assessment.
All right. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.